All right, we're about to dive into a massive scientific review that uncovers a pretty scary threat lurking in Asia's meat supply chain. It's called antimicrobial resistance, and honestly, the findings affect every single one of us. So, let's get right into it.
And if you want to know just how high the stakes are, just look at this. By 2050, deaths from drug-resistant bugs could actually kill more people than cancer. This isn't some distant sci-fi problem, it's a reality that's approaching way faster than we think. And our food system is a huge part of the story.
So what is this thing we're talking about? It's called antimicrobial resistance, or AMR for short, and you'll hear experts calling it the silent pandemic because it's a global health crisis that's been quietly building in the background for decades.
So what is it exactly? Well, put simply, AMR is when germs, like bacteria, evolve to survive the very drugs we're designed to kill them. This can turn a common infection into something deadly and makes things like surgery or chemotherapy way, way riskier.
And look, this isn't some far-off future threat. A huge study in 2019 found that AMR was directly responsible for 1.27 million deaths around the world in that year alone. It is happening right now.
Okay, so where does the meat we eat fit into all this? Well, as we're about to see, a huge driver of this entire crisis actually begins on the farm.
This slide really breaks down the whole journey. It all starts with the massive use of antibiotics in farm animals, not just to treat sickness, but often to make them grow faster. This creates the perfect breeding ground for resistant bacteria, these so-called superbugs, which can then get onto the meat during processing and end up right in our kitchens.
And Asia is a real global hotspot for this. A rapidly growing population and a huge demand for meat has led to some of the most intense use of antimicrobials in livestock anywhere in the world. That makes the region absolutely critical for understanding this problem.
And that brings us to the core of this new research. Scientists pulled off a massive meta-analysis. They combined the results from 134 different studies across 28 countries in Asia to get the real big picture. And believe me, the findings are eye-opening.
So first, they just looked for common bacteria. And what they found was that E. coli showed up in nearly half of all the meat samples they looked at. Now, E. coli is often a sign of fecal contamination, which tells you that hygiene during processing is a really big problem.
And it wasn't just E. coli. They also found salmonella, which is a famous cause of food poisoning, in almost a third of the samples. This shows that contamination isn't some rare accident, it's widespread.
What's really interesting is that the data was detailed enough to pinpoint specific national hotspots. The highest overall rates of bacterial contamination were found in meat samples coming out of Myanmar, the Philippines, and Sri Lanka.
But here's the thing, and this is absolutely crucial to understand. Just finding bacteria is only half the story. The real danger is in their resistance, the arsenal of defenses they've built up against our best medicines. I mean, just look at these numbers. The scale of the resistance they found is just, wow, it's stunning. Look at that top line. Klebsiella bacteria showed almost 98% resistance to ampicillin, a super common antibiotic. E. coli isn't far behind. And look at Campylobacter's resistance to ciprofloxacin. That is a critically important antibiotic for people.
So you might be wondering, how in the world do they get so tough so fast? Well, bacteria are masters at sharing genetic information. They can literally pass around what are called resistance genes. You can think of them like genetic cheat codes that just make antibiotics useless. One bacterium can literally teach another one how to be a superbug.
And the study was able to identify the most common of these cheat codes. But there's one on this list that really sets off alarm bells for scientists everywhere. MCR-1. This one is especially scary because it gives bacteria resistance to colistin, an antibiotic that doctors consider a last resort drug for fighting the most dangerous infections. Finding that in the food chain is a huge red flag.
And all of this, it's exactly why scientists have stopped talking about this as just a farming problem or just a human medicine problem. They now see it as a one health crisis, where the health of people, animals, and our environment are all tangled up together.
The whole idea behind One Health is actually pretty simple, but it's incredibly powerful. It recognizes that you just can't solve a problem in one of these areas without thinking about the others. A drug-resistant bacteria in a chicken on a farm is a potential threat to a patient in a hospital halfway around the world.
It all boils down to this one simple, powerful idea. What happens on the farm does not stay on the farm. The walls between livestock, our environment, and our own communities are way more porous than we'd like to think.
And we're not just talking about eating contaminated meat. The ways these superbugs can spread are, honestly, kind of terrifying.
Farm workers can get exposed, animal waste that's used as fertilizer can spread it to crops, and farm runoff can carry these bugs right into our rivers and water systems, creating these huge environmental reservoirs of resistance.
So, okay, faced with a problem this huge, what's next? Where do we possibly go from here? What did the researchers conclude after looking at all this data?
The number one takeaway from all this research is just urgency. This isn't a problem that one country or one industry can solve on its own. The data is practically screaming for a coordinated international response to what is clearly a fast-growing global threat.
So the researchers didn't just point out the problem, they laid out a 4-part battle plan. First, on the farm, we need to be much smarter about how we use antibiotics. Second, we need way better surveillance to track where these superbugs are. Third, the public needs to know about this. And finally, in the lab, we have to invest in new drugs for when our current ones stop working.
And that leaves us with one final, really critical question. The superbugs out there are evolving at an incredible speed, constantly finding new ways to beat our medicines. The question for all of us is, can our global public health strategies evolve fast enough to keep up? Thanks for joining me.